My father said, "All my kids made me proud, except her. So I gave them a show they'd never forget." My name is Victoria Martinez. I'm 32 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and for most of my life, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I understood my place in this world, especially in my family. But sometimes, it takes one moment, one cruel, devastating moment, to show you that everything you believed about yourself was built on lies. What would you do if you were sitting at a family reunion and your own father humiliated you in front of everyone you've ever loved? What would you do if the man who was supposed to protect you, support you, and believe in you instead chose that moment to tear you down in the most public way possible? I'm about to tell you exactly what I did. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why I had no choice but to give my family a show they'd never, ever forget. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand the full picture to appreciate what happened next. I grew up in a family of 5 kids. My parents, Elena and Roberto Martinez, had been married for 35 years. To the outside world, we looked perfect. My father owned a successful construction company. My mother was a beloved teacher at the local elementary school. And all of us kids were supposed to be their crowning achievements. There was Miguel, the oldest at 38, who became a doctor just like Dad always wanted. Then came Isabella, 36, who married her high school sweetheart and gave my parents their precious grandchildren. After her was Carlos, 34, the golden boy who took over Dad's construction business and expanded it into 3 states. Then there was Sophia, 30, who became a lawyer and married another lawyer, creating what my father called a legal dynasty. And then there was me, Victoria, the baby, the disappointment. See, while all my siblings followed conventional paths that made my parents beam with pride, I chose art. I went to art school, which my father called a waste of money. I became a freelance graphic designer and illustrator, which he said wasn't a real job. I never married, which apparently made me incomplete as a woman in his eyes. And worst of all, I never gave him grandchildren, which he reminded me was my only purpose. For years, I endured his constant criticism disguised as concern. At every family gathering, he'd make little comments. "Victoria, when are you going to get serious about life?" Or, "Your sister Sophia just bought another house. What have you accomplished lately?" He'd introduce my siblings with pride. "This is my son, the doctor." Or, "This is my daughter, the successful lawyer." But when it came to me, I was just Victoria. I tried not to let it get to me. I really did. I built a decent life for myself. My art was actually doing well. I had clients across the country. I'd had pieces displayed in galleries, and I was making good money, but none of that seemed to matter to him. The breaking point came 3 months ago at our annual family reunion. Every year, the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, would gather at my parents' house for a huge barbecue. It was always the same routine. Dad would grill, Mom would coordinate the side dishes, and all of us would pretend to be the perfect family. This particular year, there were about 60 people there. The whole backyard was packed with folding tables, kids running around, and the smell of carne asada filling the air. I had actually been looking forward to it because I just landed my biggest client yet, a major marketing campaign for a Fortune 500 company. I thought maybe, finally, Dad would see that my career was legitimate. I was wrong. It started during dinner. My father, as usual, had appointed himself the master of ceremonies. He stood up with his beer in hand, and the whole crowd quieted down to listen. "I want to take a moment," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "to talk about how proud Elena and I are of our children." My stomach twisted a little, but I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe this time would be different. "Miguel," he continued, gesturing toward my oldest brother, Just got promoted to department head at the hospital. He's saving lives every day and making our community healthier." Everyone clapped, and Miguel beamed. "Isabella," he turned to my sister, "just had her youngest accepted into the gifted program. She's raising the next generation of leaders while volunteering at 3 different charities." More applause. "Carlos has expanded our family business to Nevada and New Mexico. He's creating jobs and building the infrastructure that keeps our communities strong." Carlos raised his beer in acknowledgement as people cheered. "And Sofia just made partner at her law firm. She's fighting for justice and representing families who need someone in their corner." Sofia actually blushed as everyone celebrated her achievement. Then his eyes landed on me, and the smile disappeared from his face. "All my kids made me proud," he said, his voice getting louder. "They've all contributed something meaningful to this world. They've all built real lives, real careers, real families." The yard had gone completely silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and my face was burning with embarrassment because I knew what was coming. "All my kids made me proud," he repeated, and then he paused, looking directly at me. "Except her." The silence that followed was deafening. 60 people, my entire extended family friends, people I'd known my whole life, were staring at me. Some looked shocked, others looked uncomfortable, but a few were nodding like they agreed with him. "Victoria," he continued, and I wanted to disappear into the ground, "is 32 years old. She's never been married, never given us grandchildren. She plays with art like it's a hobby instead of getting a real job. She rents an apartment instead of owning property. She's never committed to anything or anyone long enough to build something meaningful." My mother was tugging on his arm, whispering for him to stop, but he pulled away from her. "I raised 5 children," he said, his voice now carrying clearly across the silent yard. 4 of them understood what it means to be a successful adult, but this one, he gestured toward me dismissively, this one is still playing dress-up and calling it a career. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking away. All I remember is finding myself in my car, crying so hard I could barely see, while behind me I could hear the party slowly resuming. Nobody followed me. Nobody called. I drove home in complete shock, replaying those words over and over again. All my kids made me proud, except her. For 3 days, I didn't leave my apartment. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't respond to texts. I just sat there, alternating between crying and feeling completely numb. The worst part wasn't even what he'd said. It was that nobody had defended me. Not one person in that yard had stood up for me. On the 4th day, my anger finally kicked in. I realized something. My father thought he could humiliate me because he believed I had nothing to show for my life. He thought my career was a joke. My independence was worthless, and my choices didn't matter. He'd built this narrative that I was the family failure, and everyone had just accepted it. But here's what my father didn't know. Here's what none of them knew. I wasn't just some struggling artist playing with crayons in my apartment. Over the past 5 years, I'd built a legitimate business. I had corporate clients paying me more than most of my siblings made. I owned my apartment. I'd bought it outright 3 years ago with cash. I had a healthy investment portfolio, money in the bank, and I'd been quietly supporting several family members financially without anyone knowing. See, when Carlos was starting his business expansion and needed a loan but couldn't get approved by the bank, I was the one who lent him $50,000. He told everyone he'd gotten private investors. But that investor was me. When Sofia was studying for the bar exam and couldn't work, struggling to pay rent and buy groceries, I was the one sending her money every month for 6 months. She told everyone she'd gotten a scholarship, but that scholarship was me. When Isabella's husband lost his job 2 years ago and they were about to lose their house, I was the one who paid their mortgage for 4 months until he found work again. They told everyone they'd worked out a deal with the bank, but that deal was me. I'd been quietly helping my siblings for years, and not one of them had ever acknowledged it. They'd all taken my help, and then stood by while our father called me a failure. But that wasn't even the biggest secret I was keeping. The biggest secret was about our perfect family business that Carlos was so proudly expanding. See, my father had always handled the books himself, never letting anyone else see the financial details. He claimed it was because he didn't trust outsiders, but I'd discovered the real reason. 3 years ago, Carlos had asked me to design a new logo and website for the business. To do that properly, I needed to understand the company structure, the different divisions, the financial scope of their operations. Carlos gave me access to what he thought were the basic business files. But I'm not just an artist. I'm also really good with computers. And when I was digging through their digital files to understand the business better, I found something that made my blood run cold. My father had been embezzling from his own company for over a decade. He'd set up a complex system of fake subcontractors and inflated material costs. On paper, the business was paying these subcontractors hundreds of thousands of dollars for work that was either never done or was being done by the regular employees. The fake invoices were being paid to shell companies that he'd set up, and the money was going directly into his personal accounts. Carlos had no idea. He thought the business was just extremely successful and generating huge profits. He didn't realize that the profits he was seeing were actually the result of my father systematically stealing from the company. But it got worse. My father wasn't just stealing from the business. He was stealing from the employees. The company was supposed to provide health insurance and retirement contributions for all the workers. But my father had been pocketing that money too. These were guys who'd worked for him for 20, 30 years, trusting him to take care of them, and he was stealing their benefits. I'd spent weeks going through the files, trying to convince myself I was wrong, but the evidence was undeniable. My father, the man who preached about hard work and integrity, who looked down on me for not being successful enough, was a thief. And I'd kept quiet about it for 3 years because I didn't know what to do with the information. Exposing him would destroy the family business, which would hurt Carlos and all the employees. It would devastate my mother. It would tear our entire family apart. But after what he did to me at that barbecue, I realized something. He'd already torn our family apart. He'd just done it slowly, quietly, with years of criticism and favoritism and manipulation. He'd created a family where I was always the outsider, always the disappointment, always the one who didn't measure up. So I decided it was time for my family to learn the truth about who Roberto Martinez really was. I spent the next 2 weeks planning. This wasn't going to be some impulsive explosion of anger. This was going to be methodical, thorough, and devastating. First, I organized all the evidence of the embezzlement. I made copies of everything, organized it into clear, undeniable documentation, and had it reviewed by a forensic accountant friend of mine who confirmed what I'd suspected. This was serious fraud that had been going on for over a decade. Then, I did something that surprised even me. I started digging into my siblings' lives. See, if I was going to expose the family's dirty secrets, I wanted to make sure I had the complete picture. And what I found was that my perfect siblings weren't quite as perfect as they pretended to be. Miguel, the respected doctor, he'd been having an affair with his medical assistant for 2 years. I found their texts on his old phone that he'd given to Isabella's teenage son. Hundreds of messages talking about hotel meetings and lying to his wife. Isabella, the devoted mother and volunteer, she'd been stealing from the charity she volunteered for. Small amounts, but consistently, for over a year. She'd been writing herself reimbursement checks for expenses that didn't exist. Sophia, the righteous lawyer, she'd been feeding information about her clients' cases to her husband's firm, allowing them to gain advantages in negotiations. It was a serious ethical violation that could get her disbarred. Carlos, the business expansion genius, he'd been having the company pay for personal purchases for years. Vacations, home renovations, his kids' private school tuition, all of it being charged to business accounts as fake expenses. My perfect family was built on lies, fraud, and hypocrisy. And they'd all been sitting there judging me while hiding their own crimes. But I still needed the perfect moment to reveal everything. And that moment came when my mother called to invite me to my father's 60th birthday party. "Mija," she said, her voice careful and gentle. "I know what happened at the barbecue was difficult, but it's your father's birthday, and family should be together." I almost laughed. After 3 weeks of not hearing from any of them, now they wanted me to show up and pretend everything was fine. "Of course, Mom," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." She sounded relieved. "Good. And Victoria? Maybe you could bring some of your artwork to show everyone. You know how much we all love your art." The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl, but I just said, "Actually, Mom, I have something much better planned. I'm going to give a presentation about my career. Show everyone what I've really been up to." "Oh, that sounds wonderful," she said. "Your father will be so proud. He certainly would be surprised." The party was planned for the following Saturday, at their house, just like the barbecue. Same people, same setup, same opportunity for my father to hold court in front of his audience. I spent that week preparing the most important presentation of my life. I created a professional slideshow, the kind I usually made for corporate clients. It looked polished, legitimate, impressive, exactly the kind of thing my father would want to show off to his friends. The first part was actually about my real career achievements. My client list, my income, my business growth, my property, ownership. All the things that proved I wasn't the failure he'd painted me as. I wanted to establish credibility before I dropped the bombs. Then came the evidence of his embezzlement, organized into clear, easy-to-understand charts and documentation. Bank records, fake invoices, shell company information, everything laid out in excruciating detail. And finally, the information about my siblings' various crimes and betrayals, each presented with the same professional documentation style. Titled the presentation, "The Martinez Family, A Study in Success and Integrity." Saturday arrived, and I showed up at the party dressed professionally, carrying my laptop and a portable projector. I hugged everyone, smiled, made small talk, and waited for the perfect moment. It came during dinner, just like at the barbecue. My father stood up to make his traditional speech, this time about how grateful he was to have such a successful family to celebrate with. "Before you continue, Dad," I said, standing up, "I was hoping I could share something with everyone. Mom mentioned that I should talk about my career, and I've prepared a presentation that I think will really interest everyone." He looked surprised but pleased. This was exactly the kind of thing he'd been wanting me to do, show some initiative, some professionalism. "Of course, Mija," he said. "Everyone would love to hear about what you're working on." I set up the projector quickly and efficiently, like I'd done hundreds of times for client presentations. Everyone gathered around, curious and supportive. This was the family reconciliation they'd all been hoping for. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady and professional. "I want to start by addressing something Dad said a few weeks ago. He said that all his kids made him proud, except me. Tonight, I want to show you all exactly who I am and what I've accomplished." The first slides were genuinely impressive. I walked them through my business, my client list, my income, my property, my investments. I could see people's expressions changing as they realized I wasn't the struggling artist they'd all assumed I was. "Over the past 5 years," I said, "I've built a 6-figure business, purchased property, and achieved financial independence. But more importantly, I've been able to help my family when they needed it." Then I started dropping the smaller bombs. For instance, when Carlos needed $50,000 to expand the business but couldn't get bank approval, I provided that loan. When Sophia was struggling during bar prep, I paid her living expenses for 6 months. When Isabella and her husband were facing foreclosure, I covered their mortgage until he found work. I could see my siblings' faces going pale as they realized where this was heading. I helped my family because that's what family does, I continued, but I kept it quiet because I didn't need credit or recognition. I just wanted to help. My father was starting to look uncomfortable, like he sensed something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. But tonight, I said, I want to talk about the whole truth about our family, because I think it's time everyone understood who we really are. That's when I clicked to the next slide. Martinez Construction, a financial analysis. The slide showed the first piece of evidence, a comparison between what the company reported paying to subcontractors and what those subcontractors actually received. Over the past 10 years, I said, my voice still calm and professional, Martinez Construction has reported paying over $800,000 to various subcontractors for work that was never performed. The room went dead silent. These payments were made to shell companies controlled by Roberto Martinez, funneling money from the business into personal accounts. My father shot to his feet. Victoria, what do you think you're doing? I'm giving a presentation about our family's success, I said calmly. Isn't that what you wanted? I clicked to the next slide, showing bank records and shell company documentation. But the fraud didn't stop there. The company has also been collecting money from employees for health insurance and retirement benefits that were never actually provided. Instead, that money was also diverted to personal accounts. Carlos was staring at the screen in horror. Dad, what is she talking about? She's lying, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's making this up to get back at me. I have documentation for everything, I said, clicking through several more slides of bank records and financial statements. In fact, I've already had this reviewed by a forensic accountant. Would you like to see their report? The room was in chaos now. People were whispering, pointing at the screen, looking back and forth between me and my father. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. But wait, I said, raising my voice to get everyone's attention back. There's more to discuss about our family's integrity. I clicked to the next section. Miguel Martinez, medical professional and family man. The slide showed screenshots of text messages between Miguel and his assistant. Miguel, everyone admires your dedication to your patients and your family, but I think your wife Maria might be interested to know about your 2-year affair with Jennifer from your office. Miguel went white as a sheet. Victoria, stop this right now. These are text messages from your old phone, I continued. The one you gave to Isabella's son without wiping the data. Very detailed discussions about hotel meetings and elaborate lies to cover your tracks. Maria, Miguel's wife, was staring at him in shock. Miguel, tell me she's lying. But Miguel couldn't speak. He just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I clicked to the next section before anyone could process what was happening. Isabella Martinez Rodriguez, community volunteer and devoted mother. This slide showed bank records and receipts. Isabella, everyone knows how much you give back to the community, but the St. Catherine's Children's Charity might be interested to know that you've been writing yourself reimbursement checks for expenses that don't exist, over $14,000 in the past year. Isabella started crying immediately. I was going to pay it back, she said. I just needed to borrow it temporarily. Borrowing without permission is called stealing, I said matter-of-factly. The room was in complete chaos now, but I wasn't done. Sofia Martinez Chen, legal eagle and ethical attorney. The next slides showed email communications and case documents. Sofia, you've built your reputation on fighting for justice, but the State Bar Association would probably be very interested to learn that you've been sharing confidential client information with your husband's firm to give them advantages in cases. Sophia was shaking her head frantically. You don't understand the context of those emails. I understand that you violated attorney-client privilege for financial gain, I said. That's grounds for disbarment. Finally, I clicked to the last section. Carlos Martinez, business expansion specialist. And Carlos, Dad's golden boy who's expanding the family business. except you've been using company funds for personal expenses for years. Vacations, home renovations, your children's private school tuition, all charged to the business as fake expenses. Carlos looked defeated. Everyone does that, he said weakly. No, I said. Everyone doesn't commit tax fraud and embezzlement. The room was absolutely silent now, except for the sound of people crying and whispering. 60 people who had come to celebrate my father's birthday were now staring at a family that had completely imploded. I turned to face my father directly. So, Dad, let me ask you something. You said all your kids made you proud except me, but I'm the only one in this room who hasn't committed a crime. I'm the only one who's built a legitimate career, earned honest money, and helped my family without asking for anything in return. He was just staring at me, his face red with rage and humiliation. I'm the only one who's been telling the truth about who they are and what they've accomplished. So I want you to tell me, in front of all these people, which one of your children should you actually be proud of? He tried to speak, but no words came out. Because here's what I think, I continued. I think you've been projecting your own failures onto me for years. You've been stealing from your own business, betraying the trust of employees who've worked for you for decades, and teaching your children that success means lying, cheating, and taking shortcuts. I clicked to my final slide. The truth about success. Real success isn't about impressing other people or maintaining a perfect image. It's about integrity, honesty, and building something meaningful without hurting other people. And by that measure, I'm the most successful person in this room. The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence earlier. This was the silence of people processing the complete destruction of everything they thought they knew about my family. Finally, my father found his voice. "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me? Get out," he screamed. "Get out of my house. You're not my daughter anymore." I smiled at him calmly. "Actually, Dad, I think you'll find that most of these people are going to be leaving now, because nobody wants to celebrate with a family of criminals." And I was right. Within 10 minutes, the party had completely dispersed. People were making awkward excuses and hurrying to their cars. Family friends who had known us for decades were looking at my parents like they were strangers. My siblings were dealing with their own crises. Miguel's wife had left with their children. Isabella was frantically calling the charity to try to explain herself. Sophia was on the phone with a lawyer. Carlos was staring at the construction company documents, finally understanding what his father had done to the business he thought he was inheriting. I packed up my projector and headed for the door. "Victoria," my mother called after me. She was crying. "How could you do this to our family?" I turned back to look at her. "Mom, I didn't do this to our family. This is what our family already was. I just showed everyone the truth. But we're your family," she said. "We love you." "No, Mom. You enabled Dad to treat me like garbage for 32 years. You sat there while he humiliated me in front of 60 people and said nothing. You called me 3 weeks later to invite me to his birthday party like nothing had happened. That's not love. That's convenience." She didn't have an answer for that. I drove home feeling something I'd never felt before in my life: complete peace. For the first time in 32 years, I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to smile while my father insulted me. I didn't have to watch my siblings get praised for accomplishments built on lies while my real achievements were dismissed. I didn't have to keep quiet about what I knew to protect people who had never protected me. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within a week, my father's business was under investigation by the IRS and the State Labor Board. Carlos had to hire lawyers and forensic accountants to try to separate the legitimate business from the fraudulent activities. Most of the longtime employees quit because they couldn't trust the company anymore. Miguel's wife filed for divorce and took the kids. The hospital started an internal investigation into his conduct, and he was quietly asked to take a leave of absence. Isabella was charged with embezzlement by the charity. She avoided jail time by agreeing to pay restitution and perform community service, but her reputation in the community was destroyed. Sophia was reported to the State Bar Association and faced a disciplinary hearing. She managed to keep her license but was suspended for 6 months and required to take ethics courses. My father tried to claim that I had fabricated everything, but the evidence was too comprehensive and had been verified by independent professionals. He ended up pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud and tax evasion. He's currently serving 18 months in federal prison. My mother filed for divorce while he was awaiting sentencing. She claimed she had no idea what he'd been doing, and maybe that's true. But she also never apologized to me for enabling his treatment of me all those years. As for me, my life improved dramatically. Turns out, being completely honest about who you are is incredibly liberating. I started a blog about my experience, talking about family dynamics, emotional abuse, and the courage it takes to stand up for yourself. It went viral and led to speaking opportunities and consulting work with other people dealing with toxic family situations. My art career took off too. Apparently, there's something about surviving public family destruction that makes your creative work more authentic and compelling. I had my first solo gallery show 6 months later, and it sold out completely. I also started dating someone, a fellow artist who appreciated my independence and wasn't intimidated by my success. Something I'd never been able to do when I was constantly worried about my family's approval. But the most satisfying part was the messages I started receiving from other people who had watched my presentation go viral online. Yes, someone had filmed it and posted it on social media, where it got millions of views. People wrote to me from all over the world, thanking me for showing them that they didn't have to accept being the family scapegoat. They shared their own stories of being the disappointment, who was actually the most successful, the most honest, the most hardworking person in their family. I realized that my story wasn't unique. There are millions of people out there who are being held to impossible standards by family members who are secretly failures themselves. People who are being criticized for not being successful enough by relatives who are cheating, lying, and stealing their way through life. 6 months after the birthday party, I got a text from Carlos. "Victoria, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. I've spent the last 6 months cleaning up Dad's mess and trying to rebuild the business legitimately. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also taught me what real integrity looks like. I'm sorry for never standing up for you. I'm sorry for letting Dad treat you the way he did. And I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to realize that you were the strongest person in our family all along." I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to think about whether I wanted any of them back in my life. Eventually, I did respond. "Carlos, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand that this isn't about Dad anymore. This is about 32 years of all of you watching him tear me down and choosing to stay silent. This is about all of you benefiting from being his favorites while I was made the scapegoat. An apology is a start, but it's going to take a lot more than that to rebuild any kind of relationship." He wrote back, "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Miguel and Sophia never reached out at all. Isabella sent a brief apology text that felt more like she was trying to clear her conscience than genuinely make amends. My mother calls occasionally, usually when she's feeling lonely or overwhelmed. She still doesn't seem to understand what she did wrong, and she keeps asking when I'm going to forgive and forget so we can be a family again. But here's the thing I've learned. You can't be a family with people who fundamentally don't respect you. You can't build healthy relationships with people who only want you around when it's convenient for them. The family I grew up in was built on lies, manipulation, and scapegoating. It was never actually functional. It just looked functional. From the outside, because we all played our assigned roles. I was assigned the role of the failure, the disappointment, the one who never measured up. But I don't have to play that role anymore. A year later, I'm living a life that's completely honest. I'm successful on my own terms. I'm surrounded by people who respect and appreciate me. I'm not walking on eggshells or trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it. And most importantly, I'm not keeping anyone else's secrets anymore. People often ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd handled it differently, maybe tried to address things privately, instead of exposing everything publicly. The answer is no. Absolutely not. My father didn't humiliate me privately. He did it in front of 60 people, at a family gathering, in the most public and devastating way possible. He made a choice to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my extended family for his own entertainment. So I responded in kind. I told the truth about our family in front of the same 60 people. The only difference was that my truth was actually true. I gave them a show they'd never forget, just like I promised. But more than that, I gave myself something I'd never had before: complete freedom from their judgment, their manipulation, and their lies. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to flip over the table and show everyone how the game was rigged in the first place. And you know what? I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because I finally learned the most important lesson of my life. Your family's opinion of you is only as valuable as your family's integrity. And if they don't have any integrity, then their opinion is worthless. I'm Victoria Martine. I'm 33 now. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and exactly what I'm worth. And I've never been prouder.